I have been asked this question many times, sometimes in words, sometimes only in tears. If God exists, why do the innocent suffer? I have heard this question whispered beside hospital beds. I have felt it in the silence of rooms where pain had no explanation. I have seen it in the eyes of children who had done nothing wrong, yet carried more suffering than many adults ever will. When people ask this, they are not asking for an argument. They are asking from a place of hurt. And I have never believed that it should be explained away. Pain is real. Loss is real. Innocent suffering is real. I have held hands that were weak from hunger. I have sat beside those who were dying alone. And I have never told them that their pain had a simple reason. Instead, I stayed. Because sometimes the most honest answer is not an explanation, but presence. People often imagine God as distant when suffering appears. They say, if God were here, this would not be happening. He is present in love that refuses to leave. When I saw a person abandoned by everyone, it did not see God turning away. I saw God waiting to be loved through human hands. Suffering does not mean God has stopped loving. It means the world is still broken and love has work to do. People ask why God allows suffering. But I ask something else. Where are we when suffering happens? Because I have seen this truth again and again. Pain becomes unbearable only when someone is alone. Where is the feeling of being forgotten? I have met people who were in terrible physical pain, yet peaceful because someone stayed with them. And I have met people who had everything they needed, yet were deeply unhappy because they felt unloved. God does not always remove suffering, but He enters it through love, through a hand that holds, through a voice that comforts, through someone who chooses not to walk away. I have never believed that suffering is sent as punishment. That belief makes people afraid of God. Love does not punish the innocent. Suffering is part of a wounded world. But love is God's answer inside it. When I cared for the dying, I did not see God as far away. I felt Him very close, not in words, but in the quiet strength to continue loving. People want reasons, but the suffering heart needs something else. It needs to know it matters. It needs to know it is seen. If God exists, why do innocent people suffer? I cannot give a reason that satisfies the mind, but I have seen something that satisfies the heart. Where love is present, God is present. Where someone stays, God stays. Where someone chooses compassion over comfort, God is there. I have seen suffering transform hearts. Not because suffering is good, but because love is stronger. When someone is loved in their pain, we often imagine that faith removes suffering, but faith does something else. It gives strength to endure. It gives meaning to staying. It gives courage to love without understanding. I have seen people lose faith because they expected God to act like power, but God acts like love. Power explains, love accompanies. An accompaniment is what the suffering need most. I do not believe God watches suffering from a distance. I believe He suffers with us through every act of compassion. Every time you choose kindness in the presence of pain, you become part of God's answer. Not a solution, but a sign that love has not disappeared, a sign that innocence is not forgotten, a sign that suffering does not have the final word. People ask where God is in suffering. I ask them to look at those who remain gentle in a cruel moment, those who forgive when it is hard, those who care when it costs them something. That is where God is. Suffering may never make sense, but love always does, and love is never absent unless we choose to be. Yet, even after saying this, I know the question does not disappear, because pain does not fade just because it has been acknowledged. The heart still asks, the tears still come, the silence still feels heavy. I have learned that when someone asks about suffering, they are often asking something deeper. They are asking, am I alone in this? Does my pain matter? Is there anyone who sees me? Suffering becomes frightening when it feels meaningless. That is why love matters so deeply in moments of pain. Love does not explain suffering, but it gives it dignity. When I sat beside the sick and the dying, I did not bring answers. I brought my presence, and again, I saw how presence changed everything. A person who had been ignored for years would suddenly feel human again when someone simply stayed. Their pain did not vanish, but their fear softened, because fear grows strongest when we feel abandoned. Many people believe faith should remove suffering, but faith is not a shield against pain. It is a light that stays on in darkness. I have seen people lose faith because they thought God had failed them. But often it was not God they had lost, it was hope. Hope is fragile when it stands alone, but hope grows strong when it is shared. That is why love is so important, because love carries hope from one heart to another. I do not believe God asks us to understand suffering. I believe He asks us to respond to it, not with explanations, but with compassion, not with distance, but with closeness. The world often wants to solve suffering quickly, to move past it, to tidy it up. But suffering does not need to be solved before it is loved. Sometimes the most holy thing we can do is to remain with someone without trying to change their pain. This kind of love is not dramatic, it is steady, it is faithful, and it reflects something very deep about God. God does not rush away from suffering, He stays. I have seen how people treat the suffering. Some avoid them, some feel uncomfortable, some look away. But love looks directly. Love does not turn its face aside. When we look at suffering with love, we restore dignity, and dignity is what pain tries to steal. Innocent suffering shakes us because it confronts our need for fairness. We want the world to be just. We want good to be rewarded and innocence to be protected. When that does not happen, our faith feels threatened, but faith was never meant to protect us from questions. It was meant to give us the courage to stay human when answers do not come. I have learned that suffering does not ask us to explain God. It asks us to reflect Him through mercy, through patience, through compassion. When we respond to suffering with love, we say something powerful without words. We say, "You are not alone. You are not forgotten." I have seen people who were deeply wounded yet peaceful because someone loved them faithfully. And I have seen people who were comfortable yet restless because love was missing. This taught me something important. Suffering does not destroy faith. Isolation does. Pain does not erase God. Indifference does. When love disappears, faith struggles to breathe. That is why every small act of love matters so much in a suffering world. A visit, a conversation, a moment of listening, a hand held quietly. These things do not remove pain, but they make it survivable. I have often said that the greatest poverty is not the lack of food, but the lack of love. Because a person can endure much when they know they are loved. God's answer to suffering has never been distance. It has always been closeness. Closeness expressed through human hearts that choose compassion over comfort. If you are struggling with this question, if you are carrying pain you do not understand, know this. Your suffering is not ignored. Your pain is not unseen. Your life is not meaningless. Even when answers are absent, love is still possible. And where love is present, God is near. And when I speak of hope, I do not mean a hope that denies pain. I mean a hope that can live inside it. I have seen suffering that did not end quickly, pain that stayed for years, loss that never fully healed, and still I have seen hope grow there. Not the loud kind of hope that pretends everything will be fine, but the quiet kind that says, "I am still here." Hope is born when love refuses to leave. I have watched people change not because their suffering ended, but because someone chose to walk with them through it. When love enters suffering, something shifts. The pain may remain, but despair loosens its grip. I remember faces that were full of fear becoming calm simply because they were no longer alone. That is the power of love. It does not remove the cross, but it helps carry it. People often ask why God does not act more clearly, why he does not stop suffering immediately. But I have learned that God often acts in ways that do not draw attention to themselves. He acts through hands that serve quietly, through hearts that stay open, through people who choose compassion even when it costs them something. Love is not weak. It is the strongest force I have ever known. I have seen love soften anger, heal resentment, and restore dignity where suffering had stripped it away. When a person is loved in their pain, they begin to believe again that life is still worth living, and that belief is where hope takes root. Hope does not always change circumstances, but it changes how we face them. It gives strength to endure. It gives courage to continue. It gives light when everything feels dark. I have learned that suffering becomes destructive only when it convinces a person that they are worthless. Love interrupts that lie. Love says, you matter. Your life has value. They are felt in the way someone listens, in the way someone stays, in the way someone treats pain with respect. I have seen people regain peace not because their questions were answered, but because they were loved without conditions. That is how hope survives, not through certainty, but through connection. The world often fears suffering. It avoids it. It hides it. But love moves towards suffering, not because it enjoys pain, but because it knows that pain needs companionship. I have never believed that God enjoys suffering. I believe he grieves with us, and I believe he calls us to grieve with one another. When we allow ourselves to be touched by the pain of others, we become more human, and humanity is where love lives. I have seen people who were broken teach others how to love deeply, not through words, but through their patience, their forgiveness, their endurance. Suffering, when met with love, can open the heart instead of closing it. This does not make suffering good, but it allows good to exist within it. Many people fear that if they accept suffering, they are giving up hope. Oh, but acceptance is not surrender. It is honesty. It is saying, this is real. Hope grows when we stop pretending and start sharing pain, sharing silence, sharing presence. That is how faith survives in suffering. Not by denying pain, but by trusting love to be stronger. I have often said that we are not called to be successful. We are called to be faithful, faithful in love, faithful in compassion, even when we do not understand, especially when we do not understand, because love chosen in uncertainty is the purest kind. If you are suffering now and your faith feels fragile, do not be ashamed. Faith is not measured by how little we struggle. It is measured by how much we love, even while struggling. God is not offended by your questions. He is close to your pain, and every time someone chooses to love you in your suffering, that closeness becomes visible. Hope does not arrive suddenly. It grows slowly, like a small flame protected from the wind. It grows through simple acts, through kindness that returns, through compassion that does not give up. I have seen this flame survive in the darkest places, and that is why I have never lost faith. Not because suffering disappeared, but because love kept appearing again and again. When love keeps appearing, something else begins to happen quietly. Suffering stops being only a question and becomes an invitation. Not an invitation we would choose, but one that is placed before us nonetheless. An invitation to become more gentle, more patient, more aware of one another. I have seen this again and again. Those who have suffered deeply often understand love more clearly than those who have not. They know what it means to be weak. They know what it feels like to need help. And because of this, their hearts are often more open. Suffering can close the heart, but it can also open it. The difference is love. When pain is met with indifference, the heart hardens. But when pain is met with compassion, the heart learns to give. I have seen people who had almost nothing give more love than those who had everything. Not because they were stronger, but because they understood what truly matters. They did not need explanations. They needed connection. And in giving that connection to others, they found meaning in their own suffering. This is something the world rarely understands. The world tries to avoid suffering at all costs. It treats it as failure, as something shameful. But I have learned that suffering, when embraced with love, can become a place of deep transformation, not because pain is good, but because love is creative. Love creates meaning where there was only loss. Love creates dignity where there was humiliation. Love creates hope where there was despair. I have often said that we are not called to do extraordinary things. We are called to do ordinary things with extraordinary love. Suffering gives us many opportunities to do this. A moment of patience with someone who is difficult, a gentle response instead of anger, a willingness to listen instead of speak. These are small things, but small things done with love carry great weight. When someone who has suffered chooses kindness, it is not weakness, it is courage. It means they have refused to let pain make them bitter. I have seen people who were deeply wounded choose forgiveness, not because it was easy, but because they did not want suffering to have the final word. Forgiveness does not erase pain, but it frees the heart from being trapped by it, and a free heart can love again. This is where God becomes visible in suffering, not in the removal of pain, but in the transformation of the heart. Every time someone chooses love, in the midst of pain, something sacred happens, something that cannot be measured, something that cannot be explained, but it can be felt. I have seen this sacredness in hospital rooms, in crowded streets, in places the world has forgotten. I have seen it when someone stayed instead of leaving, when someone cared instead of turning away. These moments are quiet, but they are powerful. They remind us that suffering does not have to isolate us. It can connect us. It can teach us to see one another not as strangers, but as companions on the same journey. This is why I believe that suffering asks something of all of us. Not understanding, but response. Not answers, but action. Love is the response suffering calls for. Not love as an idea, but love as a choice. A choice to be present. A choice to remain gentle, a choice to care even when it costs us something. We may not be able to stop all suffering, but we can stop suffering from being lonely, and that makes a great difference. I have often said that the greatest gift we can give someone is our presence. Presence says, I see you. I will not abandon you. I am here. This is what God offers through us. Not explanations, but companionship. When we allow suffering to make us more loving, we become part of something larger than ourselves. We become bridges. We become comfort. We become signs of hope. This does not remove the pain of the world, but it changes how the world carries it. And slowly, very slowly, this is how hearts are healed. Not by answers, but by love that remains. And when love begins to remain like this day after day, it slowly becomes a way of living. Not something extraordinary, not something dramatic, but something steady. I have learned that love is not proven in rare moments. It is proven in daily ones. In how we respond when we are misunderstood. In how we treat those who cannot give us anything in return. Suffering teaches us this if we allow it. It teaches us that life is fragile, that time is limited. Many people believe holiness is found in distance from pain. But I have always found it in closeness, in staying, in serving, in choosing to love again, even after being hurt. This kind of love does not draw attention to itself. It does not announce its sacrifices. It simply continues. I have seen people who suffer deeply become the most gentle souls. Not because suffering made them gentle, but because they chose love instead of bitterness. Bitterness closes the heart. Love keeps it open. And an open heart, even when wounded, becomes a place where others can rest. I have seen this rest change people. A person who felt useless begin to feel valuable again. A person who felt forgotten begin to feel seen. These changes do not happen quickly. They happen quietly. Love works slowly, but it works deeply. That is why the world often underestimates it. The world prefers speed, results, visible success. But love is patient, and patience is not weakness. It is strength that has learned to wait. I have learned that when suffering is met with love consistently, it does not destroy the soul. It refines it. Not by removing pain, but by teaching the heart what truly matters. When someone has suffered, they often know the value of small kindnesses. A warm meal, a listening ear, a gentle word. They know that these things can carry someone through a very dark day. This is why love must become a habit, not a reaction. We cannot wait for perfect moments to love. They rarely come. Love must be practiced in ordinary circumstances, in small inconveniences, in unnoticed sacrifices. This is how love becomes strong. I have never believed that faith is about feeling certain. Faith is about choosing love, even when certainty is absent. Especially when certainty is absent. Because when we love without understanding, we trust something deeper than answers. We trust that goodness still matters, that compassion still heals, that presence still comforts. Suffering does not ask us to abandon joy. It asks us to redefine it. Joy does not mean the absence of pain. It means the presence of love even within pain. I have seen joy in rooms filled with suffering, not loud joy, but peaceful joy. The kind that comes from knowing you are not alone. The kind that comes from being loved exactly as you are. This joy cannot be taken away by suffering, because it is rooted in connection, and connection is what love creates. When love becomes a way of living, it changes how we see everything. We become slower to judge, quicker to forgive, more attentive to quiet needs. We stop asking, why is this happening? And begin asking, how can I love here? This question changes everything. It does not remove pain, but it gives pain direction. It turns suffering from a dead end into a passage. Not the passage we would choose, but one that leads us deeper into humanity. I have often said that the greatest gift we can give God is to love one another, not perfectly, but sincerely. Every act of love, no matter how small, is a response to suffering. It says, pain will not have the final word. Indifference will not win. Love is still possible. When we live this way, we do not need to explain God. We reveal Him through patience, through mercy, through compassion. This is what the suffering world needs most. Not answers shouted from afar, but love lived closely. And this love, when practiced daily, does something remarkable. It restores faith, not in ideas, but in humanity. It reminds people that goodness still exists, that kindness still matters, that even in pain, life can be meaningful. And this meaning, slowly, quietly, begins to heal. And as love becomes this way of living, something very quiet begins to change inside us. We stop seeing suffering only as a question and begin to see it as a place where love is needed most. Not because suffering is good, but because love is strongest, where pain is deepest. I have learned that faith does not grow by avoiding suffering. It grows by staying human in the middle of it, by refusing to let pain turn us cold, by refusing to let fear make us distant, by refusing to let sorrow erase compassion. This is not easy, and I have never said that it is. Love in suffering asks for patience. It asks for courage. It asks for a heart that is willing to remain open even when it has been hurt. But I have seen what happens when people choose this path. They become gentler, not weaker, but softer in a way that heals. Not as problems to be solved, but as lives to be honored. They listen more. They judge less. They learn to be present instead of trying to control outcomes. It tells the suffering person, you do not have to face this alone. And that message, spoken without words, changes everything. I have seen people regain dignity simply because someone treated them with respect. I have seen hope return simply because someone believed their life still mattered. This is how faith is restored. Not through certainty, but through compassion. Not through explanations, but through love that remains. When we live this way, we stop asking where God is and begin to discover where He has always been, in the quiet acts of care, in the unnoticed sacrifices, in the hearts that choose kindness even when it costs them something. I believe God is very close to those who suffer, and I believe He draws close through those who love. Every time you choose patience over anger, you reflect something divine. Every time you forgive when it is difficult, you reflect something sacred. Every time you stay when it would be easier to leave, you become part of God's answer. This does not remove the pain of the world, but it changes how the world carries it. And that change matters, because suffering without love leads to despair. But suffering with love can still hold hope. Hope does not mean that everything will be resolved. It means that life is still worth living, that goodness still exists, that the future is not closed. I have often said that we are not called to be successful. We are called to be faithful. Faithful in love, faithful in service, faithful in compassion, even when we are tired, even when we are unsure, even when answers do not come. It simply loves. And love, when practiced like this, restores something very precious. It restores trust. Trust in humanity. Trust in goodness. Trust that life still has meaning even when it is painful. The world is full of people carrying questions they cannot answer. Pain they cannot explain. Loss they did not choose. What they need most is not certainty. It is companionship, someone who will walk with them, someone who will listen, someone who will remain gentle in a moment that feels harsh. When you become that person, even in small ways, you become a source of hope, not a dramatic hope, a quiet one, the kind that does not draw attention but lasts. I believe this is how God works in the world, not through force, but through faithful love. Not through removing every wound, but through healing hearts. And this work continues every time someone chooses compassion over indifference. Every time someone chooses presence over avoidance. Every time someone chooses love over fear. This is not the end of suffering, but it is the beginning of healing. And healing does not always mean that pain disappears. It means that pain is no longer alone. And that, in the end, makes all the difference. And so, when we come to the end of this reflection, I do not want to leave you with answers. I want to leave you with something more important. I want to leave you with hope. Not the kind of hope that denies pain, but the kind that can live beside it. If you have suffered, if you are suffering now, know this. Your pain is not meaningless. Your tears are not unnoticed. Your life is not forgotten. God is not distant from your suffering. He is closer than you think. He is present in every act of love that reaches you, in every hand that holds yours, in every heart that chooses not to turn away. I have learned that God's greatest answer to suffering has never been an explanation. It has always been love. Love that stays, love that listens, love that does not rush healing, love that does not abandon. If you cannot believe strongly right now, do not be afraid. Faith does not disappear because of questions. It weakens only when love disappears, and love can always be chosen, even in small ways, especially in small ways. You do not have to understand suffering to respond to it with compassion. You do not have to be strong to be loving. You only have to be present. If the world feels heavy, do not try to carry it all. Carry one person with love. These things matter more than we realize. They may not change everything, but they change something, and something is always better than nothing. I believe that love, quiet and faithful, is stronger than suffering. I believe that kindness, repeated day after day, can restore what pain has broken. I believe that God is most visible, not in the absence of suffering, but in the presence of compassion. So do not be discouraged by the pain you see. Do not lose heart because the world is wounded. Wounded things can still be healed. Broken hearts can still love. And every time you choose love in a moment of suffering, you help the world heal a little more. This is not a small thing. This is sacred work, and it begins and continues with love.